Eagle 6 in the track.
Roger.
Viper 1 bombs away. One's going to climb high above 20. Drift out.
Eagle 6 radar contact. Eagle 6 is visual.
And it goes left.
Welcome back to the DCS SITREP, where we discuss and analyze news and information about DCS World, the world's premier combat flight simulator for the home PC. I'm your host, Prickly Hedgehog, and unless you've been away from your computer or had no access to DCS news, you'll know that Eagle Dynamics successfully launched Edge 2.9 last week. So let's take a look at some of the features of the new graphics engine update, most of which bring significant visual and performance enhancements to the game for many of us. Not all of us, except that. Let's look at it though. ED broke down the key features as follows. Of course, there is an extensive changelog as well, and some of these we've discussed or covered in prior SITREPs, but here we go. The new voice chat features include an immersive radio system and sound effects. I haven't tested that yet. We have new data link improvements. This is for the F-16, the F-18, the Hornet, and the Apache. We've discussed those in the past. We've also discussed radar improvements for the F-16 and the F-18C. I haven't had time to check that out yet, but I'm eager to do so later this week if time allows. We have another brand new variant of an aircraft that's very, very popular, and that is the Mirage F1BE variant. Remember, this is the two-seat trainer. Argus has done a great job of this module with some artistic showcasing from Ismail Jorda, whose videos are a real treat. He also does a lot of hardware reviews with things like VR and other peripheral equipment, so well worth checking out his channel if you want to learn a little bit more about some of the peripherals that come up with the game. Updated camera view controls, which allow you to use the WASD and QE keys to position the camera on any unit. This is really neat and especially handy for those of us that do content creator type work. They have improved the track replay system. This is still a work in progress. The team advised that they have revamped this system, which was, you may recall, never originally designed as a true replay system as we have it in other games. Rather, it's more of a diagnostic tool. So usually what happens is the track files become corrupted at some point, and you'd find that all your hard-earned flying would be wasted for any cinematic recording events. And ED warned that this process of updating it means that the track files will be a lot larger than they typically are for the player recordings. We'll come back to this in a little bit, but they have improved the spotting dots that change with resolution and are not affected by zoom. That's still a work in progress. They've added the color grading option. I've tested this out a little bit. It will be a useful feature for those trying to color balance their monitors and the in-game experience, and certainly would be useful for special effects for content creators. They've added new 3D models. We've talked about this in the past, but the B1B, we've been waiting for this for quite a while. The B52, the S3, the CRAM, and the SA10. That's long overdue, especially for the Viking around the boat, where you have to get up really close to it and do the refueling, say in the Raven 1 missions. So I'm really pleased to see that in game. Transport troops using player-controlled ground vehicle with combined arms. That's a handy feature. A lot of people were curious about this and whether it would include things like being able to drop paratroopers from aircraft. I believe that is something that is planned by ED. WAGs discussed this on another channel a few months ago, so expect that to be very work in progress early on here. Say, for example, dropping troops out of the C-130, which we're looking forward to being injected in the game here. The big one here, the NVIDIA DLSS 3.5 support. We'll come back to that in a lot more detail here shortly. Many of you have seen this already. The rotor wash visual effect, again, it's still work in progress thus far. Been very, very impressed with the effort that ED have put into this. There is some more tweaking to be done, I think, but I love the experience and effect of this implementation. I still think they need to provide variation in grass length for some airfields and FOBs, but it is a huge step in immersion. Really cool to see, and as part of that too, we see the airflow effect on vegetation. Again, a work in progress as above, but it's been neat to see trees moving around now with the rotor wash, and any additions to the physical reality in the game is only good for player experience and realism. Again, love it. New Spitfire Mark 9 cockpit textures and improved details. Haven't checked that out yet, but the screenshots I have seen from ED look awesome. Lovely aircraft, of course. Speaking of warbirds, mission updates for all the warbirds has occurred, and this is to be expected, and I note a large number of campaigns have also been tweaked and adjusted to better accommodate the extensive list of changes in this patch. Moving on to the AIM-9 family of weapons, the changelog lists that the AIM-120 has a more advanced third-order tracking filter and double contour tracking loop that provides faster transient processes and high resistance to ECM blinking. They've also added the AIM-9P3, the R60A missile into the fold, and they've also fixed inaccuracies in several versions of the AIM-9. Not a lot of detail there, or they didn't go into specifics. Speaking of missiles, we have the R13M, R60, R3R, and R3S missiles. Those have been refactored, and they also made some changes to the payload drag for the R60 by way of mention. Speaking of payloads, you can now create, save, and delete custom weapons loadouts with the rearm, refuel in-game menu. Again, another nice quality of life update. Now they have tweaked here, we mentioned this before, the spotting dots feature for seeing aircraft at distance. So the dot size has increased at high resolutions, which is an oft-mentioned complaint for those of us running higher resolutions, where you basically can't even see like a single pixel tracking across the screen as your eyes are desperately searching for that bandit. The zoom feature does not affect the dot size, so it's realistic in that way, and I'd like to see improvements or inclusion of things like wing flash or sun flash on the fuselage at distance, which would increase your SA and within visual range type combat, and possibly even slightly further out than that. Disco was talking about this from a recent 10% True podcast. Really interesting. The F-15C pilot was talking about BFM when you lose SA, and then you sort of catch something out of the corner of your eye there. You realize there's an aircraft out there because of a wing flash or a glint of sunlight, what have you. And then as you see each other, or sometimes they say the bandit sees you, it's going to turn into you, which gives you the clue of the direction and what you're actually facing there. Because as soon as you turn the aircraft to, say, wings over, now you're seeing a different profile of the aircraft, which gives you a clue as to what's going on, what direction that aircraft's traveling, whether they're pulling G, etc., etc. So that's something I'd love to see improved in the game as time goes on, to just bolster realism and better SA for pilots. It is very difficult when you're looking through basically non-VR here particularly. You're basically trying to fly the aircraft through a letterbox window when you're looking at the screen, as one air warfare group guys described it, which is very, very challenging. Things like formation flying or spotting, as I said, aircraft. That lack of depth perception becomes very, very challenging in a game like this, where objects are moving very, very quickly across the sky. So we'll see how that evolves. Let me know what you think of that. Now, as you'd expect, the list of changes and fixes and updates is way too massive for me to tackle them as line items. We'd be all dead of sedentary collapse by the time we got to the end of that. So I'll drop a link in the description below for you to explore yourself if you're looking for something specific. Let's look through, though, at the critical feature, which of course is DLSS support and what it's done to the game, and I'll share my current settings with you as a reference point. Many of you have asked for that info, and be aware it's something I'm still tinkering with, so it's not finalized just yet. Now let's talk about really what we've seen and this anti-aliasing stuff, which is really where our enhancements have occurred. So you will have noticed immediately that post the update and the first time you boot up the game, that there is now an NVIDIA screen, which is a healthy sign for ED and getting graphical compatibility for Edge with modern graphics and hardware/software, right? Hardware/software. So the team described the following, that they've added support for NVIDIA DLSS using upscaling, deep learning, supersampling, which can dramatically improve game performance if you are graphics processor unit limited, right? Or GPU limited. So note though that if your CPU is limited, DLSS will have little to no performance effect. Owners of NVIDIA 40 series graphic cards will most benefit from this system. With DLSS selected as the upscaling option, you can further refine the game quality versus performance with these features, quality, balance, performance, and ultra performance presets. This is a work in progress still, bear in mind. They have added support also, so the AMD people haven't been forgotten, but they've added support for AMD FSR2, Fidelity Effects Super Resolution, or FSR, also using an upscaling algorithm to improve performance. Also, like DLSS, it will have little to no effect if you are CPU limited. So some people have already mentioned this to me, that their CPU is too old or is too limited. Whereas before you had an advantage over newer systems, under the current regime and the current improvements, that is less so. So again, still a work in progress. Now, anti-aliasing. So here is what they're saying here. So if you have upscaling set to off, there's 3 anti-aliasing modes which are available. It's tricky to say that sometime. Multi-sampling anti-aliasing, or MSAA, temporal anti-aliasing, TAA, and deep learning anti-aliasing, which is DLAA. And what do we mean when we say these things? What is the nuts and bolts of it? Well, to clarify, these anti-aliasing systems are designed to reduce jaggies, which occur in the game space where you have curved lines and are trying to generate them across square pixel colors, which make up our 3D environments. It's extremely difficult, basically, to create round or curved or slanted objects using tiny squares. The human eye can see the anomaly, and this was particularly prevalent in early games with low resolution until the development of much higher resolution screens and also anti-aliasing software and improved GPUs to smooth out these jagged lines. Now, one example of the early way that they did this was supersample anti-aliasing, or SSAA, and this is a very resource-heavy kind of software where a single pixel can be sort of stretched to multiples of 2 or 4, etc., which helps average out the color, or in simple terms, make it appear smoother or blended to the naked eye, despite technically it's still really tiny squares. As I said, it's resource heavy because it resamples every single pixel in multiple location, which can produce very high definition, but at the cost of performance. It's sort of not re-rendering, but it's sampling every single pixel in frame, which is hugely taxing on the GPU. So MSAA is one of the more modern versions of the same kind of thing. It's less taxing because it only samples the edges of objects only once, not multiple times like the supersampling does, using coverage and depth tests, etc. So one disadvantage of that is that it's not really good at blending areas or calculating light, or particularly shading areas where pixel textures occur, as the process again is only applied to edges or polygon zones. So the process is more notable in low resolution environments like, say, 1080p, or where you have a lower resolution monitor. Moving on to TAA, or temporal anti-aliasing. This again is much less taxing on the GPU because it only samples pixels in different locations between frames in the past or the future, rather than sampling every frame, say like SSAA. So there's a greater potential for ghosting though with the system, but generally it will improve performance, which is kind of this constant balance that you're playing with video games, especially graphically demanding ones like DCS. So we talked a little bit about DLSS recently in a couple of videos ago, but you'll notice that ED referenced both this and DLAA as mentioned above. So we're going to focus here on DLAA because we've already covered DLSS in that previous video. DLAA doesn't reduce the quality of the image. So this is where the scaling thing comes in, right? And it uses the native resolution to harness performance. It's DLSS without the upscaling, right? So it doesn't reduce the native resolution and then upscale it to give you a better result, but it uses the AI built into the hardware there to blend out and reduce the jaggies by sampling in a methodology similar to TAA, except it's got that AI component added to it. It's pretty cool and sophisticated stuff. So the bottom line though, with all of these different techniques, if you like, or methodologies, number crunching to get smoother imagery, it's a matter of tweaking and testing to get the best out of your system. You'll need to consider the relationships between the types of AA sampling and kind of how they work, as I mentioned, in very, very simple terms, because I'm not an expert in this area, and how your graphics card copes with that, and whether or not you're going to use the scaling or the native resolutions. Something not discussed too are the frame rates and high resolutions, which can better disguise the blending and rendering processes in conjunction, as I said, with very high resolution rates. A 4K monitor, for example, has a much high resolution rate, therefore it's much more difficult to see the jaggies in that system. But again, as long as your GPU and your CPU can handle the processing required to do that. So in other words, the more pixels you have, the better off you're likely to be in terms of artifacts, etc. As long as you can support the number crunching involved. And what you are seeing probably, and Jabbers did a great video on this, depending on the interplay between these various things, you may see some ghosting or some artifacts effects. So you might get higher frame rates, but you're going to see these other issues. And then how much can I tolerate of that? Is it too much? Have I got it set not quite right? Is it too blurry, etc., etc.? And it really comes down to a relationship between, as it always does, performance versus quality. So again, I'm not an expert in any of these areas. This is my plain man's guide to a lot of pretty sophisticated math and rendering theory. I'm still tweaking my settings, as I mentioned earlier. Let me know if you've found a sweet spot for your system and what you've noticed. To round out here, one of the things I have noticed was something I was really excited about, actually, a major performance boost with my current settings, notwithstanding some ghosting and artifacts, of course. In particular, I was impressed with the FPS rates while using the mirrors, which was always a problem in the past. So depending on the aircraft, I've noticed a couple of different types. The resolution of the pilot looked really good, and the reflected images in the background seemed vastly improved. It's fair to say that ED has indicated there's still work to do in this area, so expect future enhancements as we move ahead. But right now, I'm very, very impressed with that low level, getting down in the weeds, and still having stuff rendered in the mirrors without the game crawling to a snail's pace, or seeing some sort of pipelining and choking and stuff around those areas. And that is, you're going to take that as a really critical factor of an overall improvement. Because one of the things that's happening with all of this is, as you blend out, if you like, the pixel component to this, to get rid of those jaggies, what you generally see then is a loss of crispness, right? So you'll have a higher frame rate, but it looks blurrier, right? Because you're kind of smoothing out those edges. And as you smooth out those edges, as a fast object like a helicopter or a plane flies by, that's when you can kind of get this ghosting that you've probably seen here and there. But overall, the performance, I think, is massively improved, and that's the one thing we want, is high frame rates to give us a degree of realism and reaction time, etc., etc. And ED is not alone in this. Other games, and Jabbers mentioned this, other games will also suffer from this issue as well. It's not an exclusive ED thing. It is built into the hardware and the software that we're interacting with. So before you jump up and down and want to start poking pins into the ED developers, consider the technology and how it interacts. It's not as simple as ED screwing this whole thing up. It's much more complex than that, and it's not an exclusive ED issue. All right, let's move to another topic here, just to round out the newsletter. Obviously, we have a big sale going on right now, as we always do at this time of the year, the Halloween sale, and that will run through to November the 5th and features a large range of modules and campaigns. Not everything is discounted, so do check the e-store before you pull the trigger, but it's a great time to bundle a module with a map or a campaign and then stretch your dollars a little bit further, and you still get to earn some of those mile points as well for other purchases in the future, for maybe another sale around probably Christmas time, Thanksgiving, what have you. There's always something going on. Don't ever pay full price for a module. ED's always got sales going on, whether those early access sales, pre-purchase ones for a new module. Hopefully it's going to include the Phantom 2 coming up from Heatblur. And of course, there's always, as I said, sales going on there and after for a wide variety of products. So that brings us to the end of the SITREP for this week. Let me know what you thought of 2.9. Did it do it for you? Has it been an improvement? Have you seen a general performance improvement for you? Has it benefited you and your system? Let me know in the comment section below, and whether you think ED's moving in the right direction for this. I want to thank everyone for the support for the channel of late. A lot of subscribers last week. I really appreciate it. Helps the channel chug along, helps me fight those YouTube algorithms and boost the channel's visibility. And if you'd like to support the channel a little bit more, do hit the like, do hit the support button in some way, and you can support the channel with the super thanks option too if you wish. That just gives me a little bit more oomph to get things going and support this channel financially a little bit more, because it's a lot of work and my wife sometimes wonders why the hell I'm doing it. But I do it for love, and I do it for the belief in this amazing product, which I think last week turned another incredible corner. And once again, I want to thank ED for the work that they are doing in a niche environment, which is actually still fairly competitive and very, very demanding work when we look at the complexity of the modules that we have. So again, thanks ED, thanks to all of you for the support, and we'll see you next time on the DCS SITREP.